What's up and welcome to another edition of Locked On NBA, the biggest stories with the local experts. I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, also host of Locked On Rockets right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Today, we'll be chatting with Tony East from Locked On Pacers as the Pacers now have a 7-game losing streak. Why are things completely falling apart for Indiana without Tyrese Haliburton, and when is he expected back? How do Halliburton's injuries impact what the Pacers do ahead of the NBA trade deadline this season? But first, today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. Next game, how about Luka Doncic to score more than 26.5 points? What about LeBron James to have more than 7.5 rebounds? Or maybe Ja Morant to have less than 8.5 assists? Maybe Steph Curry to have more than 3.5 three-pointers made? What is PrizePicks? It's daily fantasy sports, but how does it work? Basically, you pick 2 to 6 players, and if they score more or less than their PrizePicks projection, you can win up to 25 times back on your money on any entry that you submit. There's no competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections available. PrizePicks offers projections on any sport that you watch. That includes NBA, NFL, MLB, NHL, PGA, you name it, they've got you covered over at PrizePicks. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's that simple. They're safe and offer incredibly fast withdrawals, currently operational in over 30 states and Canada. Download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code LOCKEDON. If you deposit $100, PrizePicks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, PrizePicks will give you $50. Don't forget to enter promo code LOCKEDON at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. Joining us now is the host of Locked On Pacers, Tony East, who you can find wherever you listen to your podcasts and on YouTube. Just search Locked On Pacers. Tony, the Indiana Pacers now 23-25 after 7 straight losses, directly coinciding here with Tyrese Haliburton missing time due to a couple different injuries, elbow, knee. Let's start there. What is the current situation with Haliburton? What's the timetable looking like? I mean, how much longer are the Pacers going to be without their key guy here?
Yeah, on the 12th, the Pacers put out that he'd be reevaluated in 2 weeks with a knee bruise and an elbow. I don't know all the words, but it sounds like the elbow is the worst of the two, given the way it's been talked about by some members of the team and Halliburton himself. And then he just went on both a Bally Sports Indiana broadcast and JJ Redick's the Old Man in the Three podcast and said that he's doing well. I think he's getting some sort of shots up in shoot around situations. He'll be reevaluated on, I want to say the 26th is the 2-week period from his initial date. And the hope is he's saying early February return. They have 3 home games in early February. The 2nd, they play the Lakers. The 3rd, they play his former team, the Kings. And then the 5th, they play the Cavs. So just guessing on what he said and their run of opponents and being at home, I would guess in that time frame. But the Pacers will hope it's as early as possible because, boy, oh boy, do they look awful with him on the bench right now.
And you got to imagine Tyrese Haliburton desperately wants to be back on the court in time to play his former team, the Sacramento Kings, given how well they are playing this season. But right now, Tony, where are the Pacers missing Haliburton the most? These 7 losses, there have been some bad losses in this stretch for Indiana. Where are some of the struggles kind of coming from without him?
It's almost not underselling it to say everywhere, right? Like, the thing that they lose without Tyrese Haliburton isn't just you subtract his 20 points and 10 assists and try to fill it in elsewhere. It's that when you have a guy like that, who's one of the best, you pick your number, I would say 3 or 5 best passers in the NBA, everyone else is now also worse, right? Like Buddy Hield is so good because he's really good at playing off of Tyrese Haliburton. Without Tyrese Haliburton, he's had some really rough games, right? He had 2 games with no made threes. In the last week, he had 0 all season before that, right? Like he's looked real much worse. Aaron Nesmith, Andrew Nembhard, 2 other starters have struggled to put the ball in the basket because they're not being set up by a masterful player like Halliburton. So everybody is kind of worse because it's harder for them to create good shots for themselves and for other people, but they're turning it over more. Their defense is taking a step back at basically the most inopportune time possible. In every game, they give up a run that they just can't overcome. A 14-0 run in the first game of this stretch was, I thought, a blip. But every game, there's been one stretch, 10-0 against the Suns in a 5-point loss in their most recent game, where they just can't stop the run, and it ends up costing them. In fact, they've had a run that was the difference in the game in 6 of their 7 losses, right? So it's not an exaggeration to say that every little thing has been worse without Tyrese Haliburton, because not only is he a master of offense who makes them better and makes his teammates better, but they score more, and so they're playing set defense more. So now they're playing transition defense all the time, and so it's just this whole ripple effect that has made them look really poor these last couple weeks.
A gigantic ripple effect, if you will. I mean, so in this stretch, Tony, who is Carlisle kind of leaned on a bit more in the absence of Tyrese Haliburton to try and make up some of that production?
Yeah, they started Andrew Nembhard at point guard for a little bit. The rookie who's been really good for being picked 31st, and he's played on the wing for the Pacers most of their games. He was a point guard at Gonzaga in college, and he's done okay. His passing has been good. He can't quite get all the way to the rim or break down to defense enough to really fill the Halliburton void. They just figured out a little something against the Suns that TJ McConnell is their closest facsimile, at least style-wise, to Halliburton. I think that's going to be a permanent change until he returns. So he stepped up. He's been really good. He had his third career triple-double on Saturday. He had the best half I've ever seen from him. I mean, everybody in NBA Twitter was tweeting about TJ McConnell having 25 points in a half against Milwaukee earlier this week. He's been one guy who stepped up. Miles Turner's looked pretty good on both ends to the stage, but kind of everybody else is missing him in some way. Ben Matherin's been forced to create a lot more because the point guards are overtaxed or are now starting. So he needs the ball more, and he's been doing a pretty good job. He just had a nice game against Phoenix. So those guys have been doing more, but not all of them have been doing better necessarily, except for I would say McConnell and Mathurin have been, better than expected in this stretch, and they've been needed to be. But the problem is that's only, 2-3 players, not 4 or 5 or the 6 you'd need to step up if you want to not go 0-7 the second your star player gets hurt.
You mentioned imagining kind of McConnell probably filling that void at least until Halliburton gets back. I mean, what in your eyes right now, or is there anything else that can be changed or adjusted right now to kind of try and right the ship over these next couple of weeks, at least until Halliburton returns?
Yeah, it's tough. Like they've tried to maintain a similar play style, being one of the fastest teams in the league, early offense and all this stuff. And at times they've been able to do it and look effective, but it's hard without Halliburton. I mean, as many things are. So I would almost suggest they slow it down a tiny bit and go to like an average speed team to, that just control your pace a little bit better. It's really hard to go fast without the guy who makes everybody, in position and can understand what needs to be done in an early offense situation. But to me, it's been really simple. Not really simple. It's never simple without your best player, but they need to win the possessions battle. Right. Your offense, their offensive efficiency, their effective field goal percentage with Halliburton on the court is about 7% better than when he's on the bench. Right. That's a huge efficiency gap. So to make up for that, you have to give yourself more chances. You have to be better on the offensive glass, and you can't turn the ball over. So you maximize the number of chances you have. There have been a few games just recently against Phoenix, against Atlanta early in this stretch where they've done a great job at those things. And those were the two games that they were the closest to winning in this stretch. But in some of their blowouts, and they've had quite a few in the 7-game losing streak, especially turnovers have been killer. Like they have to take care of the ball. They have to win the possession game if they're going to have a chance, because their margin for error right now is basically 0. So they have to win the possession game in some of these future games.
How do the injuries here to Tyrese Haliburton potentially change the approach to the deadline, which we're about, just about 2.5 weeks out from the NBA trade deadline? Are the Pacers do you expect them to be buyers, sellers at the deadline? And again, how does the Haliburton injury kind of impact their decision-making process there?
Yeah, look, I mean, if you're 23 and 25 and your core 2 players are 22 years old and 20 years old, I think it's obvious what direction that would lead a team to go. But they've been so far above expectations and so good when Halliburton plays, right? I think the number now would be 22 and 17 when he plays, which is the equivalent of like a 46, 47 win team, right? I think they were on pace for the 6th seed if he plays every game this season, which he's clearly not going to. But that's a good team. And so I would understand why they think maybe adding a player who's under contract for a long time now, if they can get him at the right price, has value to their long-term success. And if so, in that way, it makes sense to be a buyer if that player's going to stick around for a while. But in the absence of that sort of trade being available, and that's a very specific type of deal, you almost feel like they have to be sellers, right? You're two games under 500. They play the Bulls Tuesday. If they lose that game, they're 10th in the East. All of a sudden, it's like you can't be 10th in the East with your 2 best players being under 23 years old and be really pushing your chips in to improve right now. You have to take the long game approach. To me, with that sort of roster situation, I understand that Halliburton's good right now, and you have to, at some point, put good pieces around him, but I don't think this season right now would be necessarily the time to do it.
Can the Indiana Pacers right the ship without Tyrese Haliburton before his return to the lineup? Will they be buyers or sellers at the NBA trade deadline? Of course, you're going to have us covered for all of that and more over at Locked On Pacers. Tony, I appreciate you stopping by Locked On NBA with me.
You got it, Jackson. Thanks for having me.